Hi, and welcome to the next video in our series. I'm Shelley Rowe, and today I'm going to introduce the concept of Infotuition. Infotuition, because it's important for making effective decisions. So what's your best guess on the meaning of Infotuition? Now, it is a word that I created to represent the balance between cognition and intuition, or thinking and feeling. So to understand the concept of Infotuition, let's kind of review the last two videos very briefly. Now you recall that we talked about our tree model, our decision tree. And we talked about the top of the tree that represents the goals that you have for your organization, for your business, for yourself, in your work life. And that to get to those goals, there are certain decisions that you make, choices. Choices might be about a thing, the choices might also be about a behavior. And those decisions and the choices directly impact whether or not you can achieve those goals. But like the tree, remember, the tree can't function if it is just this above the ground. The tree depends upon all the stuff that goes on below the surface to capture the nutrients that drive through the trunk, the decisions and choices that create the goals that you have. It's the same for you. It's the information under the surface that facilitates and drives the decisions, choices, and the behaviors that create and result in your goals. So we looked at the brain model. And there were three parts of our brain model. Remember, we represented it with your hand. We have the logic, emotion, and values and habits in the brain. And those three parts of the brain were represented by our hand. That middle part, values and habits, was here, the emotion center, and then the logic part of the brain that wraps around all the outside of your brain. So let's just take a little bit deeper look at each one of these and the kinds of decisions that each one is applicable to. So if we look at thinking decisions, now there's a long history about thinking decisions. Decision analysis, problem-solving skills, methodologies, a lot of research that's gone into how we think things through. And data-driven decision-making. Data is a big part of those thinking kinds of decisions. And it's very appropriate. You want to have data. You want to think about the decision. It is particularly useful for kinds of decisions that are very black and white. They can be calculated. They're very confined in their options. There's a pretty clear right or wrong, yes or no in that decision. They might be very complicated, but you can put numbers around them in a large degree. And so that's really great for thinking kinds of decisions that primarily use this part of the brain. Now, a couple of things that's important about data-driven decision-making. When you think about the data, you need to understand the facts behind the facts, right? So if you look at data, there's a couple things to keep in mind. First of all, data is inherently backward-looking. So as you examine the facts about the facts, you need to understand, is the data from the past indicative of the future? And then also ask yourself about bias. Data is subject to bias, and you need to understand the facts about those facts. Bias can creep in the way that data is collected, the way that data is analyzed, and for sure in the way that the data is interpreted. The other thing to think about with the data-driven decision are the level of impact that people will have on that decision. Data is great, but if you have a lot of people involved, then you need to make sure that that data is a part of the decision-making process, but it's unlikely to be the entire decision-making process. So those are the really data-driven, logic-driven decision models. But now let's jump on the completely opposite end of the spectrum and look at habit-driven decision-making. So this is completely different. Habit-driven decisions are those that are based on great expertise that you may have. So think about the kinds of things that you've got a lot of experience in, a lot of expertise in, and when a decision comes up around that topic, it's a very quick decision for you because it's embedded in this part of your brain that's based on habit. So Malcolm Gladwell wrote the book Blink, and this is a lot of these kinds of decisions. So for example, firefighters are a great example of this kind of habit-based decision making. They're trained, they have a lot of experience, so that when they walk into a critical situation, they're not going out to say, oh, we need to go collect a lot of data. They're looking at the information immediately at hand and making that decision. Airline pilots are another example. They train, they drill, so they create habits embedded in their brain. So that in that critical moment in the airplane, if something goes wrong, they have all of that habit and that training to fall back on to look at the information readily available and make that quick decision. This kind of decision making serves you well when the situation you face is very similar to the information and the situations that have created your expertise. If that's the case, then that quick decision making coming from this part of your brain is perfectly appropriate. Lastly, let's look at the emotion generated kinds of decision making. Now perhaps you remember from the last video, we talked about that your brain is constantly looking at and wanting things to be as it expects. If something is different than you expect, then that emotion center in the brain sends off an alarm bell. It might be a really big alarm bell if you see a rattlesnake in the grass, or it might be a little bitty alarm bell. But in either case, your brain is sending some signal to you. It might be that it's recognizing that there's some long ago file folder of information in your history that it thinks you need to consider, and it's trying to bring it to your attention. It may be that it's registering a threat for whatever reason. It could be a real threat, it could be an imagined threat and perceived. In that case, you need to know because it will influence your decision, but perhaps not in the most productive way. So you need to understand how this part of the brain impacts you as well. Because the bottom line is this: all three parts of the brain are influencing your decisions and choices that determine if you will meet your goals. One key important thing, first of all, your feelings are part of your wisdom. They're coming from this other part of the brain. We give a lot of validity to the thinking part, but feelings are part of your wisdom. Feelings are either in your way to making a good decision, or they're on your way to making a good decision. But either way, you need to know how to skillfully use them, because feelings are a part of your wisdom. The second thing are about complex decisions. These are decisions that have a lot of moving parts. There is no clear right or wrong. Perhaps a lot of ambiguity, uncertainty, high-risk decisions. Those in particular need all of your brain resources to influence that particular kind of decision. In those complex situations, what the research shows is that the most effective decisions are a balance between all of these parts of the brain, the thinking and the feeling parts, the cognitive and the intuitive parts. That's what makes an infotuitive decision. For complex situations, you need to balance all of this to get to the infotuitive decision. So that's it for today, and I'll see you again next month.